did a program for a local Lutheran church, 90-minute program, Understanding Gender Diversity and Being Transgender. You should have seen the expressions on their face as they came to a better understanding of what I was sharing. And so many of them just kept saying, I had no idea. I had no idea. Which I would reply, how could you? Information is not easily accessible to you. Accurate, credible, factual information. You're being fed disinformation and misinformation, which distracts you from what's really taking place. It's empowering when you have their attention and they're willing to listen and learn, providing them with that foundation of knowledge, and then steering them in the direction of resources, whether it's my books or other sources of information. So you want to dig deeper? All the information is there that I've used for research and more, because there's biological basis to all of this.
What do you really know about people who are born transgender? Have you ever met someone who's transgender? Well, if you're like me, you're curious but hesitant to ask questions. Well, welcome to Demystifying the Transgender Journey. In our conversations with people who were born transgender, their families, friends, and the professionals who support them, we ask probing questions and discover insightful and educational answers. You can also find more information on our website, thetransgenderjourney.com. Now let's get right into today's episode. Welcome today to another episode of Demystifying the Transgender Journey. I'm one of your hosts, Lynn Murphy, author, speaker, and podcast host. Your other host today is Wendy Cole, who is a transition mentor. She transitioned at 67 years old and coaches lots of people who are in transition, not just with their gender. You know, we're all changing from one day to the next, and she's a great coach in that area. Our goal with this program is to educate people, to share stories, provide unique perspectives of different people, their personal experiences, their authentic journey. And what we're trying to do is to change people's attitude, give them access to people and to topics that they really don't know anything about. So we're educating people and trying to get past that disinformation and misinformation that's floating around. Actually, seems like it's right on top of our head some days. That's going around the social media and the other areas of the world today. We are so honored today to have a returning guest, Dr. Diana Sorrentino. She shared with us in the first episode that we did with her more of her personal, very heartfelt story of her own transition. And today she's back as an expert, going to be talking about the science and all of her research into gender. Dr. Diana Sorrentino, what do you call it? Gender differences?
Well, gender diversity and transgender identities.
All right.
An encapsulating topic subject.
So I'm going to ask Dr. Sorrentino to introduce herself to the audience, and we'll get right into some of her conversations. Dr. Sorrentino, thank you for being here today.
Lynn, Wendy, it's an honor and privilege to join you once again. And to our guests joining us wherever you are at whatever time, my name is Dr. Diana Sorrentino. I am a social psychologist and behavioral analyst. I have doctoral degrees in psychology as well as sociology. My research into the neurobiology and physiology of gender diversity and transgender identities started a little over 40 years ago, as I was coming to terms with developing an understanding of my own life experiences with gender diversity and, at the time, gender dysphoria. And for more than 35 years now, I have been working with medical and behavioral healthcare professionals, assisting them in their clinical practices, as well as to provide educational training and programs for them. I am the author of 3 books: Transgender Families, Helping Parents and Families Understand Gender Diversity and Being Transgender; The neurobiology and physiology of incongruent gender identities and sexual orientation. That is more of a biology book for the medical and behavioral healthcare practitioners because it gets into the deep neurobiology, physiological aspects originating in utero of who we are as individuals. And my third book is Adolescent Gender Affirming Medical and Behavioral Healthcare for the professionals as well as for the family and a transitioning individual. Much more in depth. It's the equivalent of a graduate level textbook coming in at a little over 900 pages and 258,000 words. It's a tome. I'm a recognized subject matter expert nationally in this arena, in this profession. So my job tonight, working with Lynn and with Wendy, is to share that knowledge, my research, my experience. Because as one individual put it so eloquently, better than I could have, my degree in psychology focuses on the individual. My degree in sociology looks at more the global aspect and the influence. And my lived experience, my transition took place, I prefer to call it my evolution, in January of 1990, a little over 35 years ago. So I have time under my belt, I have the research, I have the credentials. Where would you like to start?
Well, you have lots of credentials. I appreciate you sharing that encapsulation so that people understand that you are definitely the expert in this field from all those different aspects. So let's talk about terminology first, just to make sure people are on the same page with us. There's difference between, or at least define transgender, non-binary, gender fluid, and maybe let's throw in intersex because that's something that people don't understand.
All right. Let's start with intersex, which the term has been replaced recently by disorder of gender development. And what an intersex condition basically means is an individual may have an extra chromosome. Could be XXY, could be XYY, and at least a half a dozen other variations. At birth, it may look like the individual is a female because of the presentation of what might be a vagina, or incongruent, where the scrotum and penis is not visible at that point in time. And to drive this point home, I was asked to work with a family a number of years ago. Child was born, and congratulations, mom and dad, you have a beautiful baby girl. Well, all through prepubescent childhood, this individual did not accept or become involved with the typical female activities. Refused to wear a dress, would prefer to be out in a t-shirt and shorts with the boys and so forth. Well, mom and dad just thought their daughter is a tomboy. Well, for XX genetic females, puberty kicks in between the ages of 10 and 12. Now, some start earlier, precocious puberty, others are a little delayed. Well, to make a very long story short, at age 12, there were no breast developments and there was no menses. No period had started, which is unusual for an XX fetus. A colleague of mine has a 10-year-old daughter who's already had her first period. So at first, mom and dad thought she's a late bloomer. Well, by age 14, nothing had changed. So, of course, now mom's concerned, takes the daughter to the gynecologist for an examination. And it appears that she has a vagina, but it turns out she does not. It's impartial. So blood work is ordered, echocardiogram is ordered, x-rays, chromosome tests, the full battery. And what they learn is their daughter is XY, not XX.
Mm.
The gonads are there, but they never descended to become testes, and they never moved up to become ovaries. Now, what's an interesting fact that most people do not realize is that during fetal development, the gonads in the XX fetus will become ovaries. The same gonads in the XY fetus will become testes. And if they do not develop the way they're supposed to, you end up with an intersex condition or disorder of sexual development. It's very common. It's like 1 in 1,000 births fall into this category.
So this is something that people aren't necessarily aware of right away.
No, they're not. Now, sometimes the genitals are more pronounced as far as disfiguration, where it may look like it's just an enlarged clitoris when it could be a penis, and so forth. There are so many different variations.
Fascinating from the biology standpoint.
Yeah.
You're also telling us that there aren't just two sexes, but we'll get into that a little bit later.
Well, you have biological sex and you have brain sex, and all of this develops in utero. Now, you mentioned the gender fluid individual. I'm working with a family right now. They have an 11-year-old assigned male at birth who, I'm not a boy, but I'm not a girl either. And the individual is in this middle zone, I believe, trying to discern where they're going with their future. But at age 11, that's okay. How can they figure we're going to do at 15, 16, 18, or 20 when you're 11 years old? Transgender is very simply, I was assigned male at birth, but from a psychological perspective and a perception of who I was as an individual, I wasn't a boy. But it took me many years to come to the realization that I was female. Or those who are assigned female at birth, who at some point come to the realization that they're not female, they're male. Now, for some individuals, they can very clearly delineate during prepubescent childhood, usually no later than age 5, that they are a gender which is different from their sex assignment at birth. Gender is more than just genitals. Okay? Others like myself, because in 1966, when all this hit me like a tsunami, there were no resources available. So it took a number of years before I finally found information, support groups, the right professionals to work with, to come to a full understanding of who I was as a woman and not based on my sex assignment at birth.
Let's talk about the biology of it, since you have so much research, science behind this. What happens in utero that determines one thing or another?
At conception and during early development, all embryos are female, whether XX or XY. Typically, within the first 6 to 8 weeks of fetal development, with an ultrasound, you'll be able to discern whether it's possibly a boy or a girl. At that point, the brain is still in the default female state. If it's an XY fetus, male, in the latter part of the 3rd trimester, the brain will need to become masculinized, to draw it away from the default female state. Common logic would say, oh, testosterone masculinizes the brain. It does, but indirectly. Synthesized estrogen, which is produced from the testosterone by the aromatase enzyme, which is then processed through the estrogen receptor pathway, will masculinize the brain. So it's actually synthetic estrogen created from testosterone by the aromatase enzyme that will masculinize the brain. Now, researchers have clearly identified 21 different variants in 19 genes.
That's basically where the whole concept of gender variant and gender variant behavior begins.
Exactly. So, if all works well, in the latter part of the third trimester, the XY fetus's brain will become masculinized. However, if those 21 variants in the 19 genes in the brain's pathways interfere with the masculinization of the brain, the child will be born phenotypical male with genitals XY, but the brain will have remained in the default female state.
That's so fascinating that every fetus starts out female.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
And then there's a recipe, and if the recipe is not right, if this soup that you're talking about is not right.
You're on the mark. Now, in the XX fetus, in the latter part of the third trimester, the brain must remain in the default female state. Now, not as much testosterone as in the XY fetus, but there's still sufficient testosterone that'll be modified through the aromatase enzyme into synthesized estrogen with an attempt to masculinize the brain of the XX fetus. DNA methylation will block that from occurring, allowing the brain to remain in the female state. So at birth, you have a phenotypical female with a female brain. It's an oversimplification because it's much more complex than what I've just shared with you.
I can just imagine.
Okay. The older term was mutations, where today we call them variants to these genes. An endocrinologist I was having a conversation with a few years ago commented that birth is truly a miracle of nature. And it's like the orchestra under the guy of a conductor. Every note has to be hit precise time, everyone performing the right pitch, the right tone, at the right speed. And if there's a deviation, the conductor will know, maybe some people in the audience will recognize it, but it sounds good to the casual listener. Everything has to occur perfectly at every stage along in fetal development. But once a child is born, XY with a female brain or XX with a male brain, they will have it for life. And there is nothing that can be done to change that.
Mm-hmm.
And an example I always use is the case of David Reamer. There's a great book, it's a true story. The author is John Calapinto. As Nature Made Him is the title. 1966, Winnipeg, Canada, twin boys were born. And during the circumcision of one of the boys, the penis was irrevocably damaged. The parents learned about the new gender clinic at Johns Hopkins in Baltimore. They brought the child there, and psychologist, the sexologist, John Money, and the professionals there convinced the parents that nurturing was more powerful than nature, and that they could raise this child as a girl, and the child would never know any better.
Mm-hmm.
So at about age 2, minor surgery was performed to make it look like the child had a vagina. Child was placed on hormones and nurtured as a girl. It did not work.
Right.
There was an attempted suicide. Child was taken to a psychologist. Neither the child or the psychologist was told the history. And once the individual learned rejected the female identity that was assigned to them by the parents, took the name David in comparison to David and Goliath, went back to being male where he should have been from day one, married, adopted children, and has moved on with his life. It's a very powerful read. And it underscores that once the brain is locked into a gender identity, it's not going to change. It's been tried, it does not work.
So is there a gay gene or a transgender gene that, as you're saying, can't be changed?
Right.
Is there something biological that determines their sexual preference?
In my second book, The Neurobiology and Physiology of Incongruent Gender Identities and Sexual Orientations, I delve into that very, very deeply. There's no singular gay gene. There's no singular transgender or gender diversity gene, but multiple factors will come into play to create the variance. What takes place in the mind of a developing fetus and young child who becomes transgender is not all that different from the individual who will be gay or lesbian.
Can you elaborate on that just a bit?
Prepubescent children prior to age 7 are known for gender fluid behavior, cross-gender role play, and fluidity in their identity. That's a normal part of early childhood development. If you have that prepubescent child, assigned male at birth, has the male brain, by age 7, that behavior dissipates. They start spending more time with their peers, and their behavior changes to more masculine. The same thing with the XX fetus. 7, 8, the behavior will change to that of the stereotypical phenotypical female, and they move on, preparing to enter puberty. And these are the individuals who will actually look forward to puberty and the secondary sex characteristics and other developments that'll take place at that point in time during their evolution. Then you have others who, during that prepubescent period of fluidity, will begin to say, I'm not a boy, I'm a girl, or I'm not a girl, I'm a boy. This does not disappear at age 7, 8. If anything, it may become all the more entrenched. And if they're not supported by their parents and family and are being forced to remain in the mold that's been assigned to them, the dysphoria, the stress, and the emotional depressions will kick in the closer they become to their beginning of puberty. This is why puberty blockers are so effective and so important. Then you have the other group, prepubescent children, that show similar fluidity in behavior, who do not say they're a different gender, but will move on and maintain that fluidity in behavior. And they're the ones who become identified as gay or lesbian.
Okay.
So does that mean that gay and lesbian people are also gender expansive?
I wouldn't say that, and I did not address it as such in my book, but their orientation to who they wish to be with, intimately, life partner, whatever is in their plan of action, you might say, that's where they're going to go. And this contributes to it.
So that's something that's not changeable either.
Oh,
Correct.
Yeah. So in the prepubescent childhood, when a child is experimenting, whether they're content with it or whether they're thinking they know that they're a different gender, is a medical intervention at any point there called for?
There's no medical intervention whatsoever for prepubescent children. There's no surgical intervention for prepubescent children. Period. End of discussion.
Regardless of what we're reading and hearing in different places.
Well, what we're reading and hearing is, my God, you're butchering children. Well, let's pause for a moment. An 8-year-old and a 16-year-old are children.
Right.
An 8-year-old and a 16-year-old are minors. That's why I always clearly differentiate prepubescent children from adolescents. A prepubescent child who is insistent, consistent, and persistent in their belief that they are a gender, which is incongruent with their sex assignment at birth, may be allowed to socially transition, go full-time in their alternative gender. But no medical, no hormones, no surgical. This makes it easier for them and the family as they migrate through school. And it's also a period where they could try on to see how the shoe fits.
Mm.
And if it's not working for them, it's a very easy reverse process. Hormones, cross-sex, gender-affirming hormones, would never be introduced before the age of 16. The only thing that's introduced earlier would be gonadotropin-releasing hormone agonist, which is your puberty blocker, to put a pause, and I emphasize pause, on the development of the secondary sex characteristics that occurred during puberty. For the female, especially important to prevent breast development and to delay menses. For the XY fetus, deepening of the voice, the development of the Adam's apple, facial hair, and the list goes on. This also provides a period of time for the adolescent to assume the other gender role full-time. It's reversible. If it turns out it's not appropriate for cross-sex gender-affirming hormones, puberty blockers are discontinued, puberty kicks in immediately, and all the development will take place just a little delayed. Because puberty is not over at 18. It can continue much later.
Isn't
Now,
that into the mid-20s?
yes. Now, before puberty blockers would even be administered, a complete physical examination, physical health, metabolic profiles, comprehensive blood profile, and bone mineralization studies would be done to develop a baseline. A psychologist working with the parents and the individual would clear the individual to commence with the puberty blockers because it's a controlled process.
This isn't something you dial up on Amazon and decide you're going to take puberty blockers.
No.
It sounds very complex.
Pediatrician, you have the endocrinologist, you have the psychologist, all play an interdisciplinary role for the delivery of care. And Wendy, the work that you're doing, and a great deal of work that I'm doing with individuals and families, this is a tour guide and mentor to help guide them along their path of evolution. It'll help them understand what to expect and what it's going to require of them moving forward. After the puberty blockers are determined to be appropriate and successful, cross-sex gender-affirming hormones to be started late 15, 16. Surgery of any type, whether vaginoplasty, breast removal, breast enhancement, and so forth, would not take place until after age 18. Those are the established professional protocols.
And am I correct in what I've heard that puberty blockers are used for cisgender children too at times? That this is not exclusively something that's being used on or by people who are transgender?
Puberty blockers have been used since the 60s to treat precocious puberty in female children, XX children. This is where they'll move into puberty at age 7, 8, or 9, when especially they're not psychologically or mentally ready for those developments. I had a guest on a couple of years ago, and she had a precocious puberty. So they've been around. The problem we run into is there's too many myths, too much hyperbole, too many pathological assumptions, and of course the geopolitical arrogance, all based on misinformation, disinformation, and I'll say bluntly, stupidity.
And lies.
Yeah. Well, those are the pathological assumptions.
Yeah, thank you for making sure that we understand that. So as the child moves into puberty, even children who do not have gender dysphoria or children who are outside the binary, puberty isn't always the most fun for children anyway. So what happens with a child who has the gender dysphoria or is questioning or is gender fluid? What happens to them during puberty, depending on external influences as well as internal influences?
If the individual entering puberty, assigned male at birth or female at birth, is supported by their parents and family, have been properly assessed and evaluated, and cleared by the interdisciplinary team of professionals, puberty blockers are a pause button. It helps remove the anxiety for the individual who's on the path of being transgender, that they're not going to have to deal with the secondary sex characteristic developments that would normally take place at puberty. And as I mentioned earlier, for the XX or XY individual who's not on the path to being transgender, they're looking forward to those developments. I've heard conversations about girls 12, 13, 14 talking about their periods, and the 10, 11-year-olds, say, when am I getting my period? For them, it's something they're looking forward to. The boys, the XY, the deepening of the voice, the development of facial hair, redistribution of fat, being a little leaner, a little more muscular, it's all welcome. For the individual who is going to be transgender or is transgender, those developments are unwarranted. And if they're not supported by their parents and family, it creates tremendous dysphoria, emotional distress, and in many cases, clinical levels of depression.
Mhm.
So there are other things going on in adolescence too, a sense of who they are, a sense of self, a sense of self-worth and self-acceptance. How does this come to play with someone who is transgender, gender dysphoric?
Again, if they are under the proper guidance and have family support, adolescents, they deal at a more positive rate than their cisgender peers.
Okay. Better than their cisgender peers. Interesting.
So when parents are supportive and affirming of their true identity that they've expressed, they just don't have the psychological distress from it, is what I
Not at
think
all.
you're saying. Okay.
There's a family I worked with years ago. I
Mhm.
was entered into the equation when the individual was 12 years old, assigned male at birth. And
Mhm.
all through prepubescence, I'm not a boy, I'm a girl. I was brought in to work with the parents to give them a better understanding of the neurobiology, the physiology, and all that heavy duty stuff, and to coach and work with them. This individual was cleared for puberty blockers at age 12, cleared for hormones at 15, had a vaginoplasty at 16, which is early.
Yeah, how did that happen? I thought there was really hard, fast rules about that within
Well,
the medical community.
there's fast rules, there's hard rules, but they're flexible rules.
Okay.
This individual was progressing so phenomenally well. It was breaking all the rules. Off to college, she's now a junior, honor roll, straight A student,
Mhm.
drop dead gorgeous. Has a boyfriend, is sexually active. And it was funny having a conversation with mom one day. She goes, "It works. It works." I was surprised that the surgeon and the team approved 16 for the vaginoplasty, but this individual was more mature than the age chronologically and was not a bump in the road. This is where the interdisciplinary team is so important.
Mhm.
Pediatrician, the endocrinologist, the psychologist, and the stakeholder from the community, individuals like yourself, Wendy, and myself, so that people understand what's required, what's expected, and to provide them with the support that they need as their life evolves.
I love hearing the positive stories like that. Let's take a minute to look at the other side of that. What happens? What kind of statistics do we hear when there isn't the supportive family or the supported medical team?
The suicidal ideation rate for adolescents, transgender adolescents, whether assigned male or female at birth, who are not supported by their family and are forced into the mold based on their sex assignment at birth, the suicidal ideation rate is hit as high as 70%.
Mhm.
Suicidal attempts, 40%. Death by suicide in the 20% range. Now, during adolescence, suicidal ideation for their cisgender peers is relatively high as well, but not as high as the transgender individual who is not supported. But the adolescent who is supported, their suicidal ideation rate is lower than their cisgender peers.
Mhm.
That's a great statistic for people to understand, and that they are getting that kind of care and the difference that it makes in a family. Think about having children, wanting your child to be happy. How can people turn away from this?
Well, you'd be amazed.
Yeah, I know.
What I've found in my work is when a parent or parents plural or the family at large are not supportive, they are more concerned in regard to the impact the evolution is going to have on their lives,
Mhm.
their friends, their social networks, their profession, their work. They're more concerned about themselves, and in many cases would rather carve out the tumor that they perceive it to be, which is why many of these individuals are expelled from the household
Mhm.
because they don't want to deal with it.
Mhm.
Homelessness among trans teens has become very high in a lot of major cities.
Most definitely. There's one family I'm working with right now. The mother is fully supportive of the 11-year-old, assigned male at birth. I'm not a boy, but I'm not a girl either. Dad, I met with him once with the mom. Dad refuses, through co-parenting, they're divorced, to let their child meet with me. He refuses to meet with me again. He
That's
won't deal with it.
that's so sad. And sad for the whole family, sad for the child.
Yeah.
So when you're working with people and they come in, they're confused, this is going on with their child, and you start talking to them about the science of it all, does that usually get them more accepting and give them a path to working through this in a positive way?
Well, what it does is it allows them to develop a foundation
Mhm.
to start developing an understanding. A few years ago, I conducted a program for the local chapter of SHRM, Society for Human Resource Management. And at the end of the program, a gentleman approached me, very somber, very distraught, almost in tears. I'm living this. I'm living this. I love my child, but I don't understand this. I don't know what to do. So I sat him down for a conversation, which ended up being an hour and a half. And I said, please share with me. I don't understand this. Now, at that point, he knew I was an affirmed woman, which is probably why he wanted to speak with me. So I asked him, your child, sex assigned at birth, male. Okay. Child's transitioning to female. Correct. How old is your child? 17. Well, I paused because in my mind, that's not a child. That's an adolescent. But I wanted him to fully appreciate that I was not just listening, but I was hearing and showing empathy to him. So I kept using child. I had covered most of the biology and the physiology during my program, but I covered it in greater detail. And he goes, I asked my child to talk to me and to share with me what's going on, and they don't say anything. To which I replied, your child is still sorting things out for themselves. And it's very difficult to share with you what they're experiencing until such time as they have a better grasp on what it is they're experiencing. Reviewed again the neurobiology, physiology. And then I asked him, what is your fear? What are you afraid of?
Mhm.
My child's future.
Mhm.
Okay. I said, look at me. I said, there are the two top surgeons in the country performing affirmation surgeries are both affirmed women. I said, we are out there as professionals, very successful in our lives. Your child will have a successful life. Your child needs your unconditional love and support. Well, what do I do about family? Well, they're going to need to adapt. But if you develop a better understanding of why this is taking place, how this is taking place, and that it begins in utero, your knowledge and understanding, and most importantly, acceptance, will make it easier for family to understand and accept.
And that's unconditional acceptance.
Unconditional. There's a family I worked with, transgender son. The grandmother refused to accept transition, kept buying the grandchild female things, refused to use the pronouns, refused to use the name, constantly dead named. And then one day at the hairdresser, how the conversation initiated wasn't shared, but it turns out that the woman who did her hair has a transgender niece, female to male. All of a sudden, the two of them had something common ground to talk about. It took 2 years, but the grandmother made a 180, embraced her grandson, and moved on. The challenge for parents is it comes as a shock, number one. Number two, it's like a ghost in the room. It's not something they can grasp and understand. My work with parents is to help establish that foundational knowledge, neurobiology, physiology, that there is a basis for this, a legitimate basis for the development of an incongruent gender identity, and that it's not going to change, and it's not going to hurt the individual, provided the family provides that unconditional love, support, and allyship.
Well, they can help educate other members, which is so important, which is what you were just saying to this father.
Earlier this year, I did a program for a local Lutheran church, 90-minute program, Understanding Gender Diversity and Being Transgender. There were 60 people in attendance. You should have seen the expressions on their face as they came to a better understanding of what I was sharing. And so many of them just kept saying, I had no idea. I had no idea. To which I would reply, how could you? Information is not easily accessible to you. Accurate, credible, factual information. You've got the geopolitical arrogance. You have the hyperbole. You have the pathological assumptions. You're being fed disinformation and misinformation, which distracts you from what's really taking place. It's empowering when you have their attention and they're willing to listen and learn, providing them with that foundation of knowledge, and then steering them in the direction of resources, whether it's my books or other sources of information, which is why in my books, especially the second and third editions, I have extensive glossaries, citations. So you want to dig deeper? All the information is there that I've used for research and more. Because there is biological basis to all of this.
There's so much social media out there that it seems like some people would just find it easier to absorb, as you call it, stupid stuff, which I agree with you. There's a lot of stupid stuff out there. But are people just absorbing that and assuming, without applying any critical thinking to it, that that's the facts?
Well, when they do that, all they're saying is they don't want to be bothered.
Yeah.
They do not want to be bothered.
Maybe it has to be personal for them to feel like they have an investment in time and in a relationship to do something.
Here's another great example. My father had a very close friend, a New Jersey state trooper. This guy was so over the top homophobic, was unbelievable, to the point of being nasty. Had 2 daughters. And then one day the younger daughter informed mom and dad that she's a lesbian. You want to talk about sticker shock?
I'm sure.
All right. So all that hateful rhetoric we used to listen to for years, now he had to deal with his own daughter.
It came home to him.
Yeah.
Now it was personal.
Yeah.
One of the things that we hear about, and there have been phony studies, in my opinion, about people who detransition. Have you had experience, or can you quote any kind of statistics on that issue?
Dutch longitudinal studies have proven, as they've followed individuals who've transitioned for over 30 years, that the detransition rate is less than 1%. It's infinitesimal.
Mm-hmm.
You have individuals who transition because they think it's going to make their life easier or solve their problems, and they have not worked with the proper interdisciplinary team to make certain that they are an appropriate candidate for gender affirmation. Now, who gets lumped into that category that we read about in the media are individuals who will detransition which is not really a detransition, by discontinuing hormones so they can have a child.
Oh, okay.
Or detransition because they have not been able to have their travel documents, passports, etc., updated to reflect their affirmed gender, so it'd be easier for them to travel. That's not a detransition. That's a pause button.
Mhm.
But globally, the detransition rate is less than 1%. Now, there's a new concept flowing around that's already been debunked: rapid onset gender dysphoria, ROGD. It's a social antagonism. There's no such thing. Those individuals who, quote unquote, fell into that category, which is not a legitimate diagnosis, are usually teenagers who feel out of place in their family. It could be assigned female at birth, brothers who are receiving the attention. There are many dynamics in play, but it really boils down to a psychological disorder for the individual as far as who they are and their self-worth, and has nothing to do with gender identity. Because when I'm presented with an individual like that, I start inquiring from the parents as well as the individual. Well, tell me about your prepubescent childhood. What did you do? What didn't you do? How did you play? And if there's no history of gender fluid behavior or insistency, persistency, or consistency that their gender is different from their sex assigned at birth, you don't just wake up one morning and say, I'm not a boy, I'm a girl, I'm not a girl, I'm a boy. It doesn't work that way.
Mm-hmm.
If that does develop, there are bigger issues at play psychologically for the individual, because that person would never be cleared for any type of affirmation intervention, medical or otherwise, because they do not have the historical foundation leading to it. When I attended my first support group and I spoke to those in attendance, I was blown away. There were 40 people there. The stories were all the same. Like they were telling me about my own life. And when I work with individuals and they share their history, it's consistent. You cannot make it up. Even though
Right.
they may find information on the internet, it's not the same.
Mm-hmm.
So there's something else going on with people
Most
in that situation.
I always say that no little boy is going to just by choice one day say, oh, I'm a girl, and insist on that. Not with the socialization we go through from birth because of that sex assignment at birth.
Yeah.
We know that it's wrong by the time we begin to approach puberty. And I knew it was wrong for me before age 5.
Yeah, and that's not uncommon.
I know it's not. I've found that all out. And I was gaslit by my parents, by the psychiatrist they took me to in the 1950s.
Yeah.
Oh, you're the only one that thinks like this.
Yeah, well, then what are you going to do about Christine Jorgensen?
Exactly. And I am convinced also that all the stress and anxiety that I felt before telling my parents at age 10, and then especially after I was literally forced into the closet to hide my secret by my parents, threatened to be committed to a psych facility. I'm convinced that all of that I experienced through my teenage years into my early 20s when I tried to transition, and then after a disaster and I gave up and moved forward with a heteronormative life, the stress of hiding this, the stress of having grown up with it, the stress and the fear and the trauma from all of the stuff that I faced from 10 into my early 20s, that totally changed the course of my life.
Absolutely.
All
Well,
my energy was going into that.
yeah. Oh, for all of us. There's a marvelous book to read. It's called Marvelous Transformations. Basically, the medical life history of Harry Benjamin.
Oh, wow.
And what a great read, because he became the father of transgender medicine.
Mm-hmm.
And the World Professional Association for Transgender Health, which I'm a member of, was
Right.
originally the Harry Benjamin International Gender Dysphoria
Hmm.
Organization.
Mm-hmm.
And once Christine Jorgensen and others, we came out of the woodwork. We were forced into hiding, as you put it, because society would not accept us.
Mm-hmm.
My case was a little bit different. Everybody's case is a little bit different.
It's
But
amazing, isn't it?
when I made the decision that I was ready for my life's evolution, I like to refer to as, I stepped across the line, I adopted the female binary, I got on with my life, and I turned around and looked and I go, what was the big deal? Like, why did I wait so long?
I know.
We've had an outstanding conversation about the biology of this. And Dr. Sorrentino, I know that we're going to have other conversations about other things because you are such an expert on the topic. You've got so much to share with us. But let's wind up today for this episode as far as the biology and the up through adolescence that we've talked about. So would you summarize just some of the things that you have said? I mean, some of my takeaways from this, like one is that it's not an illness that can be cured. Are there some other takeaways from this that we can end this episode with today?
Well, it's not a pathology. It's not a psychological or mental illness. It is
We lo
biologically
we
based.
lost that diagnosis code in 2012, correct?
Pretty much so.
Okay. Okay.
It used to be gender identity dysphoria. Then it became gender dysphoria because a lot of pressure was put on the American Psychiatric Association to sort of get with the program because
Mm-hmm.
it took them years to disqualify being gay or lesbian as a psychological issue. So it takes time.
Mm-hmm.
The medical knowledge that I shared is really as of the 21st century. The imaging studies, whether it's functional magnetic resonance imaging, diffusion-based magnetic resonance tomography, has only reinforced the actual physiological differences in our brains, where trans women have been identified to have more of a female brain and trans men more of a male brain. Well, I could do a whole segment just on those studies as well. It's biologically based, it's neurobiologically based, it's not a pathological condition. It is a natural course of evolution for that individual. Period.
It's
Well,
nature.
And one other thing that I took away from that is how the gender and the sex organs develop at different times in the fetus, and that things can get in the way with that recipe that's kind of floating around in the brain at that point.
And what's also very important to understand is that this concept of heteronormative binary gender identities originated in Western Europe. You look globally, especially around the Pacific Rim, there are cultures around the world that do not conflate sex and gender the way we do. You have populations throughout the world. You have the Hijra population in India, and the list goes on.
Yep. Those are all great things we should have another episode on.
We're planning to do that. I can't wait to get into those. So thank you so much today, Dr. Sorrentino, for sharing the things that we don't normally hear and for making the science palatable.
I may promote my own website, my own podcast, which is accessible through my website. I have guests, parents, gender diverse individuals, other psychologists will come on the program. And when I'm not having a guest, it's like I'm ready to publish part 2 of Adverse Childhood Experiences. It's a 2-part podcast. First part is already published. All accessible through my website, paradoxesofgender.com. There's a lot of information there, credible information and resources. I recently had a psychologist from Melbourne, Australia on as a guest who happens to be trans and neurodivergent. What a fascinating podcast that was. So if you visit the website, click on the podcast page, you can scroll down, there's a brief description, hot links, you click on the hot link, it'll give you more information and take you right to the audio. And it's in MP3 format, so you can download them.
Oh, I can't wait. I've listened to some. I haven't listened to all of them. I'm going to look for that one that you were just talking about. They're
Well,
fast.
this Friday, we're recording our 59th episode.
Wow. Congratulations.
That's huge. Thank you.
We're working our way up toward that, and we appreciate you being part of our effort too. So
What really amazed me with my podcast series is currently I have subscribers in 82 countries. 82 countries. It just underscores the global hunger for credible information.
there is, and thank you for being part of that education process. Anything else we can do to support you in your efforts to teach and?
Well, having me as a guest is more than I can ask for.
Well,
Honor and privilege to work with the two of you.
thank you for being here today. And I do want to give another shout out to your book, Transgender Families, and we will put that in the show notes. And we want to thank our audience today for spending this time with us on Demystifying the Transgender Journey. I'm Lynn Murphy, one of your hosts. Wendy Cole is your other host. And we appreciate so much Dr. Sorrentino being here today, just to clarify things that get kind of lost in the weeds when people are reading social media and listening to politicians. So we plan to have another episode or 2 or 3, we'll see, with Dr. Sorrentino. So join in on those. Be sure and like, subscribe, leave comments. We'll respond back to you, and let us know if there's something else that you're interested in hearing about. And we will let you know once you subscribe. Next time we're going to have Dr. Sorrentino on, and also some of our other fabulous guests. So thank you for being with us today. Stay curious and stay kind. Thank you for joining us today on this episode of Demystifying the Transgender Journey. Remember to subscribe so you don't miss a single episode of our fascinating interviews. You can also find more information on our website, thetransgenderjourney.com. So until next time, stay curious and stay kind.